Imagine being locked inside a room with no way out. No windows. No voice heard. No one coming back. Now imagine days turning into weeks. Weeks into months. And then, something even worse. They forget you're still alive. This isn't fiction. This is a story whispered through history. Of a man sealed away, hidden behind walls, abandoned by the very people who put him there. No trial. No rescue. No mercy. Just silence, darkness, and time slowly erasing him. Because sometimes, the cruelest punishment isn't death. It's being forgotten. While you're still alive. It began without warning. One moment he was a man with a name, a place, and a life that moved like any other. He spoke, he worked, he existed among others who recognized him. And then, in a single moment, everything changed. He was taken. No public accusation. No formal trial. No explanation that made sense. Just orders given in silence, carried out by men who did not ask questions. They brought him to a place far from the noise of the outside world. A structure built not for comfort, but for control. Thick stone walls. Narrow corridors. Doors that shut with a finality that echoed long after they closed. At first, he believed this was temporary. People always do. He waited for someone to return. For answers. For a voice to explain the mistake. But none came. Instead, he was pushed into a small enclosed space. Barely large enough to move freely. The air was still. The silence, heavy. The door closed. And with it, the last connection to everything he knew. Time passed differently inside that space. Without light, without sound, hours blurred into something unrecognizable. He counted moments at first, tried to track the passing of days. But the darkness consumed everything, even his sense of time. Still, he held on to hope. Because surely someone would remember. Someone would realize he was missing. Someone would come back. But outside those walls, life continued as if he had never existed at all. And slowly, the truth began to form. He hadn't just been imprisoned. He had been erased. At first, he tried to stay strong. He spoke to himself in the darkness, repeating his own name over and over, afraid that if he stopped, even that would disappear. He whispered memories like they were lifelines, faces, places, moments from a life that now felt distant and unreal. But time inside that space was different. There was no sunrise, no sunset, no rhythm to hold on to, just endless silence. Days melted into each other until they lost meaning. Hunger came and went in waves, sometimes ignored, sometimes unbearable. Thirst scratched at his throat. His body weakened. But it was his mind that began to crack first. He started imagining sounds. Footsteps in the distance. Voices calling his name. The faint echo of doors opening. Every time he rushed toward hope, only to be met with nothing. Silence again. At some point he stopped counting days. There was no point anymore. Time had become a prison of its own, stretching, bending, breaking him slowly. He began talking to things that weren't there. Shadows became companions. The darkness felt alive. Sometimes he laughed, for no reason. Other times he screamed until his voice gave out. And still, no one came. The worst part wasn't the hunger. It wasn't the darkness. It was the realization creeping deeper into his mind with every passing moment, that the world outside had moved on, that no one was looking for him, that he wasn't waiting anymore, he was being forgotten. And in that endless silence, something inside him began to change. Not just his body, but who he was. There comes a point when survival is no longer about living. It's about enduring. By now, his body had changed. Weak, thin, barely recognizable. His movements were slower, heavier, as if the weight of time itself had settled into his bones. But it wasn't just physical. Something deeper was happening. He no longer remembered what normal felt like. The sound of another human voice, gone. The feeling of sunlight, gone. Even the idea of freedom began to feel unreal, like a dream he once had but could no longer fully recall. His thoughts became fragmented. Sentences broke apart. Memories faded at the edges. Sometimes he tried to remember faces, but they blurred into nothing. Names slipped away. Even his own identity started to feel distant. Who was he before this? He wasn't sure anymore. The darkness wasn't just around him now. It was inside him. At times, he would sit for hours or days without moving. Not sleeping, not thinking, just existing. Other times, panic would hit without warning. His heart racing, breath sharp, as if he were trying to escape a place that had no exit. He scratched marks into the walls once, trying to leave proof that he was still there. Eventually, even that stopped. Because what was the point? No one would ever see it. No one would ever know. And then came the most terrifying moment of all. Not when he screamed. Not when he broke. But when he became quiet. Completely quiet. Because that was the moment he stopped fighting. And in that silence, the man he used to be disappeared. No one knows exactly how much time had passed. Days? Months? Years? Inside that darkness, time had lost all meaning. And then, something changed. At first, it was just a sound. A faint echo, distant, unfamiliar. Footsteps. Real ones. For a moment, he didn't react. His mind had played tricks on him before. Voices, sounds, illusions that faded the second he reached for them. But this time, it didn't fade. The sound grew louder, closer. Then came something he hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. Like a thin crack appeared as the door slowly opened. A sharp beam cut through the darkness, piercing the space like a blade. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the room was no longer completely black. He recoiled. The light burned his eyes. His body, weak and unprepared, struggled to respond. Even the air felt different, heavier, unfamiliar. Figures stood at the doorway, but he didn't recognize them. He didn't even understand what he was looking at anymore. They spoke, but their words meant nothing to him. The sounds were distant, distorted, like echoes from another world. One of them stepped forward, hesitant, as if unsure of what they had found, because what stood before them wasn't the man they had locked away. It was something else, something broken, something forgotten, something that had survived, but not remained whole. They hadn't come back for him. They had stumbled upon him, by accident. And in that moment, a terrifying truth became clear. He had never been meant to be found. They pulled him out, but it was already too late. The light followed him as he was dragged beyond the door, into a world he no longer recognized. Voices surrounded him, urgent, confused, almost afraid. But to him it was just noise. His eyes struggled to stay open. The brightness was unbearable. Every sound felt sharp, overwhelming, like his mind couldn't process it anymore. He didn't speak, not because he couldn't, but because the words were gone. Whatever language he once knew had faded into silence. They tried to help him, gave him water, food, space, but he didn't react the way a normal man would. He flinched at touch. He stared at walls for hours. He barely acknowledged the people around him. It was as if the world had become too much, too fast, too late. Doctors, guards, witnesses. None of them could understand what they were seeing. Because this wasn't just a prisoner who had suffered. This was a man who had been completely erased, while still breathing. His body had survived, but his mind had been left behind in that dark room. And the most disturbing part? No one could say exactly how long he had been there. No records, no memory, no accountability. Just a forgotten human being, discovered by chance. And in the end, the truth was more horrifying than anyone expected. They hadn't just locked him away. They had erased him from existence, long before they ever opened the door.